Let's go.
Welcome to the show. Get ready to learn powerful tools for enhancing leadership effectiveness with today's guest, Dr. Khandicia Randolph, an enthusiastic author and expert in leadership and organizational development. She is an international speaker and presenter of diverse topics who also advocates for inclusivity and equity for all populations. Dr. Randolph shares her expertise through training and development workshops, symposiums, conferences, summits, and curriculum development. Listeners and viewers, here and at home, welcome our host, Dr. Whitty.
All right, welcome to Dr. Whitty today. We're so glad that you tuned in, and we are ready to get this power-packed episode on the way. We're going to be talking about effective communication skills for leaders. If you're out there, just drop some comments in drop a comment in the chat. Let us know you're out there. Let us know you can hear us. Let us know you're live and ready for the conversation on tonight. We want to welcome our guest, Dr. Khandicia Randolph. She is a leadership expert and an author, and she's an advocate. So we want to welcome her, and we just want to give her a hand for taking time out of her busy schedule to be with us. So I just can't wait to get into the conversation. But I want to go ahead and just say a little bit about Dr. Khandicia real quick, and I'm going to read it. She's a dynamic thought leader. She's an educator. She's an advocate for transformative communication with a wealth of experience in leadership development, and she also brings a fresh perspective to the art of effective communication. Welcome, Dr. Khandicia Randolph. How are you feeling?
Thank you, Dr. Whitty. I'm feeling great after that introduction. So in fact, if you could send it to me when this is over, so that I can kind of skirt it into those brief bios that people ask you about that I always have trouble pinning. It's good to be here. It's always any day, as the old people say, any day above ground is a good day.
All right, definitely. You got it. It'll be in your inbox right after the show. All right. So I tell you what, I'm going to just get right into it. Like you always say, let's go, let's get it, right? So
all right, let's go.
What about this effective communication skills for leaders? Why is that important?
Okay, so we started with the big question first. You didn't even start with a small question. Like I was hoping we would build to that question. So you realize that you started at the end, and so now we're going to have to peel back everything. So essentially, you cannot be, if I were just to give it a one-liner, you cannot be an effective leader in the absence of effective communication. It's just impossible, right? And it's impossible for a myriad of reasons. A good leader understands how to articulate the vision. In order for you to get buy-in, you have to be able to articulate a vision. You have to be able to articulate a mission. Well, you can't articulate anything if you can't communicate. And so then we have to kind of drill down a little more and really look at the definition of what communication is. And we can go into that later. But the crux of it is, if you cannot adequately, efficiently, and I would dare to say extraordinarily, communicate with individuals, you cannot lead them properly. Because again, if you go back to what leadership is, it's the ability to guide a group of people, rather, to a shared or common group of goals or to a destination. You're trying to get them to move essentially from point A to point B. Well, you can't get them to move from point A to point B if you're not somehow communicating with them what needs to be done in order to move from point A to point B.
Exactly. Thank you for that. I like how you started off and you talked about buy-in, because it's so important. And a lot of leaders don't understand. We want people to buy into the mission. We want them to buy into everything that we're talking about and what we're trying to get people to understand. But in fact, people are not going to buy into the mission until they buy into the leader. And in order to gain that buy-in, like you said, we have got to learn how to communicate. We've got to develop our communication skills. And I already know that you agree with that. So I thank you for your definition of communication. Communication. So when you think about communication style, talk to us about some different communication styles.
Okay, so hugely important. I actually saw that question when I was looking over your one of the show questions, and like I really, really want to hammer this into people. Communication styles are your authoritarian, democratic, and laissez-faire style communications. Those are the three basic communication styles. They're not communication theories, and they're not leadership theories. I actually heard someone who was running for a campaign within an organization say that leadership theories were authoritarian, democratic, and laissez-faire. And I'm like, no, that's not right. So me, what do? I fact check myself. I fact check the person. I go to the books. But there are really three types of leadership, or three main types of communication styles when it comes to leaders. You're looking at the authoritarian, the democratic, and then the laissez-faire. Obviously, research shows us that the democratic style is the most productive and the most effective way to lead a group of people. And with the authoritarian style, essentially what you have is it's a dictatorship. It's a tyranny. It's just what the autocratic definition of a society or a political regime would be. I tell you what to do and you're expected to follow it. You're not expected to give me any flack. You're not expected to have a clapback. You aren't expected to have a discourse about what it is I told you to do, how you feel about it, what you think about it, why it could be right, why it could be wrong, why there's no cultural sensitivity involved, why there's no cultural agility involved. It's just you do it and the person reacts and in turn does it or does not do it. And then you're either labeled as a good follower, a good employee, or you're insubordinate, right? When you look at the laissez-faire style of communication, while it is better than the authoritarian, it does present some autonomy to your followers. With that, it really means hands off. And the term laissez-faire is a French term that was used when originally developing the documents for the US. So when you're looking at extracting things from the Magna Carta and building the Declaration of Independence, as well as the Constitution, that term is often thrown around because they wanted the government to be off hands and not have so much control of centralized power. So in case you guys can't tell, I was also a political science major in undergrad. And so when you talk about laissez-faire communication styles, that's what it is. It's a supervisor, a manager, in this case, a leader, is handing down a directive. And hey, I trust you to do it. Like, by all means necessary, so to speak. I'm not coming back to you. I'm not checking in with you. I'm not offering you additional assistance or any other help. I'm saying, hey, you need to get this done. And, however you do it, you do it. So then how does that differ from authoritarian? Well, in the authoritarian communication, like I'm telling you exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it, why to do it. And there is no room for pushback. With laissez-faire, you can give pushback, but the leader is kind of like, okay, that's fine. All right, do it however you see fit. Whereas with the democratic, form of communication style, there's that dialogue. There's what communication is actually supposed to be, which is a process of information that is didactic and that goes between multiple points of processing. It is here. We need to get this goal accomplished by June 30th. Okay, well, why do we need to get accomplished by then? Well, this is what's coming from upper management, or this leads into our new fiscal year, which starts July 1st. Okay, that's great, but I think that perhaps we should look at carrying it out this way, or the way that we want to then communicate or transfer this information down to other people within our department or who are on our team we don't have time to have one-on-one conversations. And so we need a very engaging newsletter, or we need a 30-minute video that explains everybody hands down, this is what we need to do. What do you think about that? It is more of a dialogue and a discourse rather than it is a monologue or directive. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you for that.
So,
When you when I think about the breakdowns and of the breakdown of the different styles, I think about today how I would say back when I was younger, or not only in the home but in the workforce, a lot of the communicative style was authoritarian more so, where you would be told, "Hey, do this," and you didn't really ask questions, you didn't really ask why, you didn't challenge, you just you did what you were told, and so there were reasons for that. But what I find that today, not only in households, but even at work, even when I do classes at work and I talk about communication style, and we talk about things, that we talk about reasons why the newer generation, such as Gen Z, um, it's not the same. It's not the same. And one of the frustrations that I hear a lot is, well, I just can't communicate with this particular group of people because they ask too many questions. And um, what do you say to that when, if somebody comes to you and that is what they say to you? I can't communicate with this group of people because I'm used to telling somebody what to do and them not needing so many answers or responses before they carry out the directive or the order or whatever you might say. What do you say to that type of leader?
and so first of all, let's look at the examples that you provided us. What happens in my house and what happens in the real world or in my professional career are two different things. When I was a child, yes, when I was a child, and so obviously I'm giving it from my perspective, which is not a Gen Z perspective. I'm not ashamed to say that. I do have siblings a couple who are Gen Z, and I have nieces and nephews. But especially when you get into some cultural things. So I'm going to give an example of that in a moment, if you remind me, and I'll come back to the cultural competency and the cultural intelligence part of it. But even if you just look at it from a broader perspective, from the U.S. at least, right? I've never lived in another country, but it stands to reason that in most developed nations, children live with their parents. Now, the age at which they go off to school, work, military is going to vary. Some live at 16, some live at 18, some are still there at 40. But for those who are still considered minors by however that society and that nation or that state defines minor, that conversation looks different when you live in my house and I pay the bills. Like, there is no conversation. Wash the dishes. There's nothing else to be said. Yes, it is absolutely in that situation an authoritarian communication style because you need to wash the dishes. They're dirty. You're 14. You live in my house rent free. You don't pay the mortgage. I go to work every day. You go to school. Your job, when I was a kid, my mother told me your job is to go to school and whatever the chores are, right? And so it's my reasonable service to wash the dishes. There should not be a conversation about why I have to wash the dishes. Did I ask you why you want to eat? No. When you tell me you're hungry as a 5-year-old, as a 10-year-old who can't necessarily cook for themselves, I don't ask you why you're hungry. You're a human being. You need to eat to survive. So I need to provide you with food, whether it's ordering a DoorDash, Uber Eats, Grubhub, going to the store, cooking something, putting the pizza in the stove, calling someone and asking them to bring it by. You have to eat, right? And so if I tell you to clean the kitchen or clean the bathroom or do your homework, there's no room for negotiation. There's no room for questioning. That's just it, right? You live here rent free. You do. And I'm not asking you for rent. I'm not asking you for a mortgage payment. I'm not asking you to give me $5 on the lights bill. But what I am telling you is that your payment is a certain level of respect and it's a certain level of obedience. It doesn't mean it's blind obedience. If I tell you to go jump off the building, then yes, you by all means should have some questions for me. But me telling you to wash the dishes, go to bed, stop talking, stop being a grown folks' business, like that's not really up for debate, right? When you have, as a child, I don't live in your home by reason of happenstance or voluntarily. I live in your home because I was born to you. You adopted me. You're my grandparents. You're my aunt. You're my uncle. Uh, you're my older cousin. There has been some benefactor, something has happened in life, whether legally, biologically, or even by environment, that has landed me in your home, and you have agreed that you will take care of me until such a time as I can go and be on the word and take care of myself. That's a lot differently than being 25, 30, 40, 50, 60 years old and being in the workplace and being told to do something a certain way, when in fact, because you have all of these qualifications that they want you to have for an entry-level position, I want you to go to school, I want you to work 5 years in this capacity, it would be helpful if you had this certification and if you've been management material. You want me to follow you blindly? You want me not to ask you why we're using this process instead of that process? Or you tell me to send out an email and I tell you, well, the email is going to take 35 minutes to read and no one's going to read it. So perhaps there's a different way we can do it. Let's have a Zoom on Friday and just communicate this information semi-face-to-face to people, because I can guarantee you they won't read that email. There's room there for discussion. There's room there then for something that's dualistic and didactic and that moves back and forth and in circles. But that kid who lives in your house, they don't have any room to do that. Now, does that mean that they should not have a say-so in certain things, right? Like, even if your kid is 5, hey, do you like this shirt? No. Okay, you don't like that shirt. Does a 5-year-old know what they like? In some instances, yes. In other instances, no. But if they know they don't like that shirt, that's an opportunity to have some open dialogue, right? But there's just some things we're not talking about. We're just not talking about you doing what you need to do. I don't feel like going to school today. Why not? I just don't. Okay, not a good enough reason. You're not sick. Nobody died. It's not a tornado outside. There's not a blizzard, which, by the way, I went to school in a blizzard. Some things were just not, there's no room for the democratic level of communication. Then again, as a parent, as your children age and mature, you can give them some of that democratic style. You can give them some of that laissez-faire style. It might be a situation where, like, we just had a long weekend here in the U.S. People were off yesterday. And so typically, maybe you have all of your chores done on a Sunday night. Well, if you don't have to get up and go to work tomorrow, if the kid says to you, I don't know, a 15, 16-year-old, you say, hey, you need to make sure your lunch is done. Okay, mom, dad, I will. But since we don't have to go to school tomorrow, can I wait and do it tomorrow? Okay, that's a reasonable request, right? But, a 5-year-old telling you that I want to stay up until midnight, there's nothing for us to really talk about in that situation.
I agree. I think one of the things that we're missing a lot of as well, not only in the home as leaders, but also in the workplace as leaders, is there seems to be we term it disconnect, but I'm just going to say we're missing that connection, that ability to connect. Because just for instance, what I see a lot of is, we get people who come into the organization, but then we don't hold them in the organization because we fail to connect to them on the type of level that is beneficial to them. We're only focused on what is important to us or the organization, and we don't connect with them on a level where we try to discover, hey, what's important to that person? How can I connect with that person to get them to feel like they're part of the organization, that like they're part of the team, like their contribution actually matters. So what do you say to that?
All right, great. So that brings up 2 points. One has to do with small talk. Until I was actually a student of communication, meaning I did research, I wrote papers, I did research projects, surveying people using primary data, I thought small talk was useless. I don't like small talk because it's superficial. I'm not a superficial person. Nothing about me is superficial. There's some vanity, but actual superficiality, that's just not who I am. And so small talk always seemed to serve me no good. And as I was reading the literature one day, it stated that small talk is necessary to the effectuation of good communication, excellent communication, effective, stellar communication, because it's in those moments that you learn things about people that you might not typically know. For instance, if you say to someone, "Hey, how was your weekend?" Right? Somebody on the surface like me is like, "I don't really care how your weekend was," right? But then if you actually listen to what that person says, they may say, "Oh, well, my weekend was okay. Son had a soccer game, daughter had a softball game or a dance recital, my wife was in a cooking competition." Then what happens is, okay, now you found out something about that person. And so 2 weeks down the road, something happens with the same individual and maybe they're late for work. It's not like them to be late for work. But then instead of assuming that they're just AWOL or they're not being responsible, you catalog your memory and you say, "Oh, that's right. That person has a kid, has two school-aged children. So maybe one of the kids woke up sick. Maybe they had an emergency and had to take them to the hospital." Surely your job is not the first thing you're thinking of. If you have to take your kids to the hospital, or if you wake up and your kid is throwing up everywhere or has a 105-degree temperature, and maybe your spouse is spazzing out about it, as you continue again to have these small talk, small interactions with them, you say, "Okay, well, what you do again this weekend?" "Oh, well, had a long weekend because my son, who, as I, like I told you, they play softball or soccer or whatever, and they were in a tournament. And so we were on this side of the state one day, this side of the state the next day, and then next weekend we have to go to Oklahoma." As a leader, that provides an opportunity for you to do something. And if you work that typical work day of 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, or 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, that gives you the opportunity to say, "You know what? This person has a kid who's heavily involved in sports. Let me take some initiative and see what we can do on Fridays to get them out of here by noon, so that when they have to travel for competitions or for competitiveness, they're not against the gun trying to get out, or they're not having to take 2 cars per household because mom had to go with sister, had to go with the 2 kids, rather, and head off to the competition. And then I'm leaving at 5, and I hope I get there by the 4th inning or the second half of the basketball game," right? That gives you an opportunity to create some social capital and some human rapport that you would not necessarily find out, or honestly would not find out, if you weren't having what seems like these like little meaningless conversations that may only last 2 to 5 minutes sporadically. You might also find out, "Oh, how are you doing?" And I've learned that certain ethnicities and populations of people, you ask them how they're doing, and they like tell you the whole life story. "Oh my God, my dog died. We had a barbecue, and then my wife's aunt came and got drunk, and she fell all over the place, and she threw up. We have to get the carpets cleaned tomorrow, and it's really just okay." I don't really care about that, right? But if that person then says something to you like, "Yeah, rough weekend. My mom's in the hospital, and we're not sure what the prognosis is, or what they don't have a diagnosis yet, or we just got the prognosis and we're trying to figure out how we're going to adjust as a family." Well, that gives you some more insight. And so if that person's performance is lacking this week, or was lacking last week, and as you're beginning the week and you're looking back over performance and you're like, "Man, that person was off, they missed this email doesn't make a lot of sense." Now you have that information by communicating with them that leads you to understand, oh, they were probably off because they started to go downhill on Wednesday. These emails didn't make any sense Wednesday afternoon. Thursday, they were just all over the place. Mom must have gone into the hospital on Wednesday, right? That's information that you can't get if people just come, sit, work, and leave. And I understand, and I'm a very private person. Like, going to work was not social hour for me. I wasn't there to make friends. But if you are intentional about actually communicating with the people who you work with, then what happens is, or those people as a leader, right? If you're actually intentional, and if you say to somebody, "Hey, how are you doing?" You're actually listening to what they're saying, and it's not just some passive question, then you're able to get information that you may be able to utilize towards their benefit. The other side of that is something that's hugely important. It is the cultural agility piece of it. You have to have cultural intelligence. If you don't have cultural competency, it is so difficult to communicate with a wide span of people. And let's understand that cultural competencies are not just based on race, ethnicity, demographics. They're based on age, they're based on socioeconomic status, they're based on people's education, and it all affects how you communicate. The base definition of communication is the transfer of information from one being to another, specifically in humans. And so, how I transfer that information, process it as I'm receiving it, and then push it back out to you, if I don't have the right cultural intelligence, I'm going to misinterpret something.
All right. That was good. That was great. You covered a lot of areas, and as you talked about, if I would give it a word for small talk, that to me that is the same as rapport, building rapport. A lot of people don't like to engage in that, that small talk. But like, as you said, when we hold those little conversations of small talk, it's a way to build a rapport with that person, and it demonstrates to that person that you are interested. Like you said, you have to be intentional, and a lot of times, I think that's what we're missing as well. Is we don't have any intention on actually learning about another person, or learning about their culture, or learning about what's important to them. The focus is just on, hey, I just need you to come in. I just need you to get this mission done, and just move on out, and then we'll be right back in here tomorrow, the next day, the next week, the next month. And as long as you're performing, I don't care about anything else. Not saying I don't, but that's the general attitude of a lot of leaders. And going back to what I said earlier, that type of leader would lack buy-in, because that person is sitting there like, this person doesn't know anything about me, doesn't care anything about me, yet they want me to perform and produce above and beyond. And so, of course, that's the problem. And so, as you were talking, those are just some of the things that popped in my mind as it pertains to leadership. Now, I know you talked a lot about communicating being the process of information being transmitted, if you will. Now, what about, because we can transmit communication all day long, right? But it's not only is our transmission important, but the understanding, the way that we as leaders communicate, that's important, correct? Because we can say a lot. Like one of my favorite quotes is, everybody communicates, a few people connect. And that right there, that just rings a bell to me. Not only that one, that, people don't care what you know until they know how much you care. Those are two quotes that stick into my head as a leader, because I think it's so very important that people understand that you care about them as the employee, as a person, and not only that, but people care about connecting. And as you talked about the cultural competent aspect, I like to say cultural humility. I did my research on cultural humility, and I think that's a piece that's also missing in organizations today, that culturally humble leader. Because a lot of people feel like, I know all there is to know about my culture as an African American. I know everything there is to know about the Hispanic culture. I know everything there is to know about the Caucasian culture. And that's the wrong concept. Cultural humility says, I don't know everything there is to know about any other culture. I'm aware of my own biases within myself that I have, not only towards my own culture, but towards other cultures. And so I realized that this is going to be an ongoing, lifelong process. I'm never going to reach an end state that says, I know all there is to know, but I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to share my biases. I'm willing to learn about somebody else about aspects of them and their culture that's important to them, not just what's important to me, but what's important to them. So when you brought up that cultural competence aspect of leadership, I thought that was very important, and I just wanted to throw that out there that we in today's organizations, I think that we're missing cultural competence. I think we're missing cultural humility, those culturally humble leaders, and I think that's where we're also losing a lot of the newer generation in the workplace. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you bring up the cultural humility part of it. There's almost an interdependency between the two concepts, right? You can't become culturally competent if you do not first acknowledge that. Let me back up on that one. I take that back. I still think that there's an interdependence, but your cultural humility is predicated on your ability to acknowledge your ignorance and your inability. Ignorance not in a defamatory manner, but in its simplest definitive state of being simply not knowing something, right? I am ignorant as to how people in lots of parts or most parts of the world do lots of things, right? I haven't visited most of the world. I haven't studied those cultures. I haven't immersed myself in them. And so in order to have a desire, and here's where the interdependency comes in order to have a desire to become culturally competent and culturally agile and culturally intelligent, you have to first acknowledge and understand I don't know everything, even about being Black. I don't know everything there is about being Black, and that's for several reasons. One, I'm not every Black person. Like I cannot be Shaka Khan. I am not every woman. And just like I'm not every Black person or I'm not every woman, I am not every woman. Every woman's experience and every Black person's experience is not my own. We are not a monolith. That has become a very popular phrase, but it's very true. We're not one-dimensional as a people, whether we're talking about Black people in America, other members of the African diaspora. You can even look at people who are Black from the same city, but depending on where you grew up in that city shapes what your experience is, and it adds to that collective experience of being Black. Are there common denominators in threads that are interwoven throughout the DNA and the fabric of what it means to be Black in America? Absolutely. However, you cannot assume, and that's where your cultural intelligence comes in, you cannot assume that just because I am Black, that my experience was the same as another Black woman on your team, or because I am a woman, that my experience is the same as another Black woman. One example of that is Father's Day and Mother's Day, right? People have gotten into the habit and they think that they're being kind and cordial, and they think that they're being mannerable, and they tell every woman they see, Happy Mother's Day. Well, that's triggering for people. Women who could not have children or do not have children because they never found the right man, or because their spouse died, or any other set of circumstances, you telling me Happy Mother's Day may send me spiraling. It might send me to a depression. It may be triggering for me. It may be triggering because I lost my mother, or I recently lost my grandmother, or an aunt who was like a mother to me, or a godmother. And so we have to become culturally intelligent enough and culturally competent enough to understand that in order to be effective in our communication, in order to be effective in our leaders, in order to want to move from culturally humble to culturally competent, we have to immerse ourselves. What's different about that culture when they communicate? And it's not just the whole, oh, that person speaks a different language, or that person has an accent or twang and it's hard for me to understand them. But one example that I used a lot, and I cited in a textbook chapter that I co-authored that looks at the cultural and racial implications, the implications rather of culture and race on followership, is an example of myself in my previous work situation where I communicated regularly with a supervisor who was a Black female, like late 40s. And then there was my supervisor who was a white male. And where the cultural competence piece comes in is that this Black woman, female, who I would communicate with regularly, I would ask her a question. And to your point that you made earlier, her responses to me would be very curt. I didn't get even full sentences. I would just get a yes or a no, right? Whereas when my supervisor communicated with me, I got more information and more words and more sentences than I ever needed. And it was just overkill for me. And so what I really had to do was to stop one day and realize that this woman was not being curt with me. She wasn't being short, neither was she being rude. It was a byproduct of how she was raised.
Okay. So now, I guess what I would say to that, from your experience, would you say that perhaps she might be open to an adaptive style, or as a leader, because I think as leaders we have to be willing to be adaptive in our leadership style in order to connect and to relate with the different people that we work around every day.
So there is a leadership theory called the adaptive leadership theory, and you just described it perfectly. It is where we are somewhat chameleons, where as leaders you do adapt, and it's not based on the situation, it's based on the needs of the followers. There's also a leadership theory called situational leadership, where your leadership then changes, it amalgamates, it transforms based on the situation. Adaptive leadership is about the followers, which is a person. Situational leadership is about the situation, the external factors, the goals that you're trying to achieve. And so understanding that communication is part of that arsenal that you need in order to be effective in your leadership, it would absolutely make sense that at some point it has to be adaptive. And by being adaptive, it doesn't necessarily mean that you stop being genuine and or authentic. It might mean you change the way you communicate. So for me, I feel like I'm a habitual texter. It doesn't mean that I don't talk to people, but I probably text you before I call you unless it's something specific or alone. I'll be in a room and text with you. And I think a lot of it has to do with when I was in my doctoral program, texting people was an easier way to keep in touch with them because it didn't have time for long drawn out conversations. Like I could not be on the phone with people for an hour. If I was on the phone with you for 20 or 30 minutes, that was 20 or 30 minutes that you were taking out of time that I needed in order to study. And so I've just kind of continued in that nuance. Not that I didn't text before, but definitely has increased since then. But there are people in my life who are much more communicative by means of actually picking up the phone and calling and even video calling. And so as a leader, you have to understand, and really that should be something that you ask someone as you're onboarding them, as you are adjusting them and moving them from one position to another. What is your preferred style of communication? Are you okay with email? Are you okay with an instant message? Some people don't even like instant messaging. I found this out in my former workplace. And I think it tended to be a little bit of the older demographic sometimes, but they were just almost anti-IMing. They needed an email. They needed a phone call. And so part of being an astute leader is understanding when you need to adapt, where you need to adapt, and who you're adapting to fit. Because if you don't grab that person's attention, they're never reading the email. They're not reading the newsletter. And you also have to understand when to use different medium forms. Like when is it appropriate to send a video message? When is it appropriate to put something in a newsletter or to use a newsletter to convey something? What is the frequency of the communication with your group, your department, your company? The people you're leading in an organization. All of those things play into it. And then something that I forgot to mention in our previous response, or my previous response that you brought up, is how you're interacting with people and making sure that the interactions are healthy. Well, that comes with the use of emotional intelligence. And that is an absolutely imperative part of communicating effectively, and one that doesn't really get discussed enough.
All right. Before we go to a break, I have a question I'm going to put up here from Donald Watt. He said, do you believe there are situations where authoritarian leadership is necessary in certain circumstances? So I'm going to give that question to you. What are your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. I believe that it has its place. And I think those persons who were in the military will probably agree with me in terms of its frequency or its necessity. If I am on the battlefield and I give you a command, nobody has time to talk about it. You probably don't even have time to process, other than to process what the person, your commanding officer, just said. They said, shoot 30 degrees northwest. All right. We don't have time to think about why they said it. Offer another suggestion unless that suggestion is life-saving. Again, when you look at a parent-child situation, I'm not a proponent of being your child's best friend or your child's friend at all. Especially while they live in your house. You know, when you get grown and do some other things, that's a different story. But when these people are living, crumb snatchers, as you call them, when they're living rent-free in your house, mortgage-free, grocery bill-free, it is absolutely appropriate to have some authoritarian conversations with them. So I think that communication style, I shouldn't say I think, that communication style, when you're talking about when it's appropriate to employ the authoritarian versus the democratic or even a laissez-faire style, is really going to be based on the situation. And so you might best pair it with both adaptive and situational leadership styles.
Thank you. Thank you. Shout out to Donald Watts. He just graduated. So I just wanted to say that. I'm proud of you, DJ. Keep going. Don't stop. All right. Getting back to his question. I totally agree with you. And can you give us an example of when that is also appropriate just in the common workforce today? The authoritarian style.
So again, it all depends on what your job is. If you are a police officer, a firefighter, any of those high stress, high demand, those split second, in the moment decision has to be made type of a situation, there are many times there's little room. And I know someone who's out there who's in law enforcement will say, well, I disagree. My commanding officer gave me this command and I chose to do something else because I had a different lens or I had different experience. And that's fine. If experience taught you to do something else, so be it. But most times you're not going to communicate it with them. You're just going to do it. And if you do communicate, it's a very brief communication. It's, I don't think we should do that. They tell you to do it anyway, and then you go and you decide what you're going to do. So those situations that are high impact, that are life or death situations where decisions have to be made now, you're going to find a lot more authoritarian circumstances for communication, or authoritarian style communication, rather than democratic and laissez-faire. When you look at the hierarchy of how the organization is set up, if the organization is not set up in a collaborative space, if they are not set up such that people's input is welcome, valued, even by employees or managers or what have you, then you are going to see more of that authoritarian. Even looking at systems, if the systems are more linear than they are agile or dynamic, or even, in a circular phase, then yes, it's going to be more of do this, do it now. And there may not actually be room for a conversation or an exchange of ideas. And I think in those situations, that's really when it's unfortunate, because now you're clipping people's wings. But I, again, absolutely think that there are those appropriate times. Moving away from law enforcement, I watch a lot of Food Network. And so if you look at how kitchens in restaurants are set up, you have your executive chefs, but then you also have sous chefs, and then you have line cooks. If the executive chef says, hand me a stick of butter or give me a bottle of white wine, that line chef or even that sous chef is not having a conversation about it unless the sous chef is looking and saying, hey, Chef so-and-so, You ask for a stick of butter, but you're actually making lasagna and butter doesn't go in that recipe, right? Otherwise, it is a do this, hand me that, reach in there, I'm coming behind you. It is a very matter of fact, little room for an exchange or a transference of ideas type situation.
So thank you. I like your example, and immediately when you was just giving that example, it made me think of understanding, because that's a big piece of communication, right? And so that's where I believe that a lot of the questioning comes in at, is the lack of understanding, the lack of the situation, the lack of the priority of the task to get done, the lack of just a lot. But in that specific situation, when you said, hey, he asked for a stick of butter, but you're actually doing this. And that person, because of that understanding, they were able to say, well, wait a minute, I better say something because of this particular thing. But a person who lacked the understanding might have just handed the stick of butter. So I think understanding is that a big piece in the communication process. And we'll get into that a little bit more after we take a short, quick break. But I want to say shout out to Stedman Davis. I see you. Thank you for tuning in, Steady Rock. And yeah, that puts a smile on my face. So we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk more with Dr. Khandicia Randolph. Stay tuned.
Dr. Khandicia Randolph's book, The Black American Church, Leadership Dispensation and Challenges, critically examines leadership within the Black church, drawing from historical and anthropological perspectives. It identifies challenges faced by this vital institution in the Black American community and proposes practical solutions. The church's impact on Black culture and leadership is explored, emphasizing its historical context and influence over nearly 5 centuries. Through research and data, the manuscript aims to enhance the church's effectiveness and cultural relevance. Get your copy where books are sold today. Dr. Ian Buchanan, a native of East St. Louis, Illinois, is the CEO of the NIA Education Group. He is deeply committed to servant leadership and addressing inequities. His best-selling book, King, a 4-part leadership framework for Black men, is making waves in the leadership community. His extensive experience spans teaching, school leadership, and advocacy. Pick up your copy of King today wherever books are sold.
All right, so we are back with Dr. Khandicia Randolph. We're talking about effective communication skills for leaders. We're so glad that you have tuned in to the show today. And so we're going to go on and talk a little bit more. And then what we would like to do, if you are out in the audience, if you take a look at that link, if you would like to come up online and ask myself or Dr. Khandicia a question or make a statement in reference to this particular episode today, we want you to click on that link, to put that link in your browser. We want to bring you up on stage, and we want you to have a question or a quick statement that may be beneficial to the episode and also to our listeners and viewers. So if you're not shy, go ahead and put that link in your browser so we can bring you up for a question. We just ask that you be ready with your question, that you be specific, and because we are under a time frame. So, Dr. Khandicia Randolph, we talked about a lot. Something that I would like you to talk about real quick is I want you to talk about the importance of active listening and the importance of being empathetic or empathic leader, having empathy.
Okay, so active listening in being empathetic. So the empathetic goes with the emotional intelligence, but we're going to take them 2 at a time. First of all, when you're talking about active listening, there is we were taught, or at least I was as a child, and I'll be honest, I had somewhat of a privileged, uh, not upbringing, but privileged educational setting. Active listening, and I remember taking a course in college as well on this. It was actually a communications course. It's funny that I think about it now. Um, it it really tried to hammer in the need for active listening as imperative to being a good communicator. And I'm not saying that that is not true, right? But here's where active listening on its own is insufficient and gets us in trouble. Active listening is simply the act of taking in, so we're not going to use words to define words or concepts. So it is a human that is listening and processing the transmittance, the transfer of information that's coming from another person. In other words, I am silently hearing, digesting, processing what you are saying. I engage in a certain body manner. So if anybody's really paying attention to me, I'm veering off to the left a little bit when I speak. It's not because I'm cockeyed. It's because of the way my screen is set up. Dr. Whitty is to my left and I'm in front of me, and I feel like I'm talking to him when I look at my left. And so it's engaging your body in so that the other person knows that you have my attention. That's the end of active listening. Active listening does not teach us about our body language. Active listening does not teach us about confirmation bias, and it doesn't teach us about listening just to respond. You can be an active listener and still listen only to respond. I can actively listen to you, be quiet, engage, hear, process everything you have to say, but the only reason I'm doing it is not to actually get your perspective, to be educated, to learn something new, but it's so that I can respond to you. So essentially, I'm only at the game to study your tape and come back with a better defense next game. So that's all these sports people. I know it doesn't look like I speak sports, but I do. So active listening doesn't tell us that, right? An actual astute communicator does not listen solely to respond. Do we respond as we listen or after we listen? Sure, absolutely. But we do not listen for the sole purpose of responding. We listen with the intent to gain information, to help somehow better a situation, change a situation, address a situation, move to a different part of the organizational lifespan, a different part of this project. We listen to get the instructions so that we can get to this particular destination. We listen so that we can find out how to complete this recipe properly. We listen so that we know when we get taken out of timeout, we know which play the coach has actually called. For those of you all who don't know how football works, no, the quarterbacks do not actually remember the plays that are called in the huddle. They have earphones on the inside of their helmets. And so the coach calls the play. They have to then listen, not to say something back to the coach, but they're listening so that they can know then how to move from the huddle to the position of lining up. And then what am I doing with this ball afterwards? Am I throwing it? Am I running it? Am I staying in the pocket? Am I moving outside of the pocket? We got 2 yards left on this first down. I'm going to try to run it myself. All of those things are taking place. And if you listen just to respond, you actually are not fully engaging in listening. And the other part of that is confirmation bias. You can actively listen and still engage in confirmation bias. But astute, effective, extraordinary, stellar communicators do not listen just for confirmation bias. You should not be listening to someone, whether it's a subordinate, a team member, your kid, unless you know your kid has told you, excuse me, I just let my English lapse there. Unless the kid has told you a lie that you already know is a lie, and so you're listening to catch them in the lie, that's a different story. But for all intents and purposes in a grown person's world, we don't listen just to confirm what we already know, unless it's a situation that is imperative to what I know has to be what I know. And so we're moving forward. But actual people who are engaging in leadership that is going to be positive and progressive and not destructive, we don't listen just to confirm a bias we already have against someone. We listen to learn. We listen to understand. We listen to grow. We listen to get instructions. And so then when you say you listen to understand, that's where that empathy comes in. And empathy is a germane aspect to emotional intelligence. So then the question comes up, well, what is emotional intelligence? I'm glad you asked. Emotional intelligence is the process by which you adjudicate. I use the word adjudicate. I know a lot of people are like, okay, that's kind of a big word. Let's scale it back. So it's the process by which you take in emotions, your emotions and other people's emotions. You process them, you filter them, and then you manage them, right? So you don't just manage what you say, you manage how you react, you manage someone else's emotions, which is very hard and it can be very mature what to do. But so how do I manage somebody else's emotions, Dr. Randolph? What does that look like in a real scenario? Well, what it looks like is if you're having a conversation with somebody and they go here, they're on 10 and you were at 2 and you're just trying to have a chill conversation with them, you got to match, don't go matching their energy. So for any of the millennials or my Gen Z people, don't match that energy. You absolutely do not match it. You do not always have to meet people where they are. Sometimes you do. Let me be clear. Sometimes you just have to meet a person where they are. I'm not that person who's so holier than thou. I won't tell you that that's not the case. But emotional intelligence commands that we do not match that same energy. If someone is in a meeting and they don't know how to adeptly express how they're feeling about something, we don't go there with them. In fact, if they're at 10, we stay at 2. And what eventually happens is that they come off of 10. They may come slowly, but they go from 10 and eventually they come to a 5. And when they're at a 5, then you can move up to a 4 or 5 and you can match that energy. Because at that point, it's a safe space, it's a safe tone. But that emotional intelligence is so important because that's when you learn to employ that empathy. That's when, if you take the example that I used earlier, and you have an employee whose kid plays sports and they're always on that grind on Friday, and on Monday it's very stressful for them, maybe you employ that empathy, that emotional intelligence. You say, you know what? Why don't you on Mondays, how about you work 10 to 6 instead of 8 to 4? And then on Fridays, if you can give me 30 minutes extra throughout the week, go ahead and leave it 12. Or if they're a non-exempt employee. If they're an exempt employee, they can leave it 12 anyway. So you use that emotional intelligence that makes you a more effective communicator. And you learn how to just become more prudent in your litigiousness. You have to be litigious with your words, with your actions, with your communication. And I know it's hard to do with body movement, and I haven't mentioned this yet, but I have to mention this statistic when I talk about communication. Research shows us that 60 to 90% of communication is not verbal. It is expressed in our body language. Why is that important? Well, it's hugely important for someone like me whose face always shows it all, right? Like, I don't have to say a word to you, but you know if I'm perturbed with you, you know if I don't agree, you know if I think something looks a little off, because my face is going to tell you. And so does that mean that I'm trying to improve you with some psychedelic mind trick over someone? No, absolutely not, right? It is not your job to do voodoo on somebody's facial expressions or to do voodoo on your facial expressions. But even if your facial expressions show that you're upset or that you're stressed out or that you're tense, you can relax the rest of your body. You can take a deep breath in, push out that stress so that the rest of your body is not communicating some type of aggression or being overly aggressive or even being confrontational. And so you just have to learn how to become, again, litigious and learn how to be jurisdictional with both your and other people's emotions. And then you do have to learn how to employ empathy. We're all human. I don't care what race you are, what color you are. There's a saying by Maya Angelou, and she quotes someone else, but it's a video that she does, and she goes, I am a human being, therefore nothing human can be foreign to me. If you use that when you're being, again, litigious with how you are then dispensing and taking in those various emotions and then how you're giving them back to people, it makes a difference. It makes a difference in your tone. It makes a difference in your affects. It makes a difference in your word deliverance. You may choose, if you can control some of those other things with your emotions, your words are less harsh. The way you say them. My mother used to tell me as a child, it's not what you say to someone, it's how you say it. And there absolutely is a difference between saying no or no thank you and saying and yelling or belting out no or berating someone with a no, right? So having that emotional intelligence to be able to curtail and not exacerbate a situation is key for leaders.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. As you were talking, the only thing I could think of is it all boils down to what you said earlier, and it's basically that connection, that small talk, because you can't understand how to be a part of setting a brave space or a safe space without actually knowing the people that you're working around. So thank you for that. We have one question here. As a person who likes to talk but rambles, what techniques or methods can I use to develop my impromptu speaking skills?
Okay, I think there's two different issues there. First of all, you're talking to a person who is long-winded, so I don't know that I'm the best person to help you with that problem. I'm a leadership subject matter expert, but not one in being in brevity, so to speak. But there is an art to being concise and succinct. And some of that comes along with, and I'm not saying this is your problem, Donald, because I don't know you personally. Like, I would have to have a conversation with you personally to see if this was your issue. But some people really just are not astute in the art of succinctness, meaning they know what they want to say, but they're not adept in knowing how to put it concisely or putting it in one or two sentences. And so they find themselves, as you put it, rambling. Someone says, "Hey, how are you today?" "Oh, well, I'm not really sure. I woke up a little late." Instead of being able to say, "I'm okay. I got a late start, but it's good." Right? Think about it as when you go to speak, what's the nucleus of what you're saying? What's the most important thing? If you can't say but two sentences or 5 words, what is it critical that your audience knows when you're talking about it? Practice it. You can do some writing exercises on Word. Word has a counter in there. You can count how many words you're saying and ask yourself a question and try to hold yourself to 50 words or less or 30 words or less. I don't know what your brevity, your depth, your breath scope is, but if you're one of those people that takes 100 words to say what could be said in 40 or 50, challenge yourself to remove all of those ancillary and unnecessary words. And then also, remember to focus on what's really important. Extra details are great, but what is it that people are really asking you?
Yeah, thank you. And to just add to that, as I would say, it's really great that you have your own self-awareness, that you are aware that you ramble. That's the key, is just knowing that, hey, this is what I do. And so make sure that when you're talking to others, that every time you're aware of that, you take note of it. And like Dr. Randolph said, go back and revisit those conversations and then practice on how you can stop rambling or stop repeating information 2 or 3 times instead of just saying it one time and being a little bit concise. And it just takes practice. The self-awareness is a start. So thank you for your comment. I tell you,
absolutely. I'm sorry, Dr. Whitty, can I add one thing to that? I
go
realized
ahead.
I kind of left off part of his question. He
Go ahead.
also asked about impromptu speaking.
Yeah.
Some people are just not good speaking on the cusp. I know some people who are brilliant, but because of the way the neurology works in their brain, because of the way the synapse fire, they're not good on answering things on the cusp because the way they process is a little bit differently. And so, again, having that self-awareness that Dr. Whitty said and determining, is it that you ramble? Is it that you take a little bit longer to process? And so while you're processing is really when you're rambling. And then once your brain has figured it out, then you do give a more concise and succinct answer. If that is actually the case, then learn to take that step back. Give yourself, have the emotional intelligence, have the emotional and personal awareness. When someone asks you a question, you say, okay, let me think about that for a second. And then you answer. instead of giving 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 sentences before you actually get to the point. There's nothing wrong with taking a moment of silence, taking a beat to figure it out.
Yeah, and I don't like to use the term piggyback, but that's what's coming to mind right now. It just makes me think of when Dr. Randolph talked about listening to respond. And so a lot of times that rambling comes from, I say it's cueing. It's when you are, like she said, your brain is searching for something to say and is not quite sure. So you're cueing, and so your mouth is moving and you're saying a bunch of things, and then as soon as your brain figures something out, it flies out your mouth. And sometimes that happens even if it doesn't make sense. And so I use that as something that I talk to people about when it comes down to communication is you listen to understand, you listen to hear. Don't listen to respond, because what you're doing is you're practicing cueing. You're like when you call a place and they say you're number 10 and you're just sitting there waiting, and you're putting something in the queue, and your brain is searching for something, and then you're just spewing something out, and you haven't really given yourself time, like Dr. Randolph said, to process what's coming in and how to respond to it so that it's concise and that it makes sense, and that it's a benefit to those that you are actually speaking to or communicating with. I hope that gave you some insight on your comment and your question, Donna. Thank you for that. Dr. Khandicia Randolph, I wish we had more time. I know you have another engagement. I've got so many more things I wish I could have brought up tonight on leadership and effective communication, but I think we hit a few areas that leaders can take away, that they can practice. And I'm sure that our discussion on leadership is not going to end here, as I have more episodes on leadership coming up. So I hope that you guys that are out there, listeners and viewers, that you would tune in every other Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Dr. Whitty Today, and we're gonna keep it rolling. So Dr. Randolph, before we take off, tell people where they can find you outside of Dr. Whitty Today.
Absolutely. So you guys can find me on a multitude of social media platforms: LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, although or X. I don't use it much, but if you were to tag me, it does give me a notification. In terms of LinkedIn, I am Dr. Khandicia Randolph, MA, MPA. There's another page that's Dr. Khandicia Randolph, which is my author's page. I encourage you to go to both of them. Feel free to connect with me. If you have additional questions, you can always DM me. I do actually answer my DMs. I try to be timely. You can visit me online on my website. My consulting firm is finerconsultingservice.com. So it's HTTPS, Finer Consulting Service, no S on the end of service. .com. You can schedule a consultation. You can sign up for coaching. If you are a doctoral student or a grad student who needs coaching, help with writing, you can get me there. Also, if you type in my name, it's fairly unique. So if you find a platform that has me, go forward. It is probably me. If there's no picture of me, it may not be me. If you send me a message and I never answer it, probably a fake page, but very accessible. I do trainings, I do workshops, I do symposiums, I write books. So again, if your organization is struggling, if they're not struggling, they just want to know what they can do better. If you're looking at capacity audits, all of those things, org development, leadership, symposiums, webinars, contact me and let's see how we can work magic together.
All right. And you can see me here, not only on YouTube, LinkedIn, formerly known as Twitter, Facebook, and I'm probably forgetting one, but those LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, X, and did I forget one?
We both forgot YouTube, funny enough. So you can find Dr. Whitty on his YouTube channel.
On YouTube. And all of my handles, you can just type in Dr. Whitty as you see it, DrWhitty, and you can find me. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Once again, thank you for Dr. Khandicia Randolph. Join me next time on June 10th. We're going to have Dr. Timothy Felton on, and he's going to be talking about his book, Black Boys Matter. So I challenge you to tune in. I'm telling you, it's an awesome book. Join in, because that is going to be one powerful conversation. We will see you next time on Dr. Whitty Today. We hope that your mind, your spirit, and your soul has gone to college. Thank you. Stay tuned.
Thank you for joining us on Dr. Whitty Today. We appreciate your time and viewership. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit that like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and most importantly, subscribe. Your support keeps us going, and we can't wait to have you back. Until then, stay curious, stay inspired, stay motivated, and stay tuned.